Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world more perplexing than a cat trying to catch its own tail. The realm of bizarre inventions throughout history that somehow, against all odds, managed to kill a boatload of people. We're not talking about your great-uncle's questionable fish fry. No, we're exploring contraptions crafted in the name of progress, like the death by toilet or the exploding carriage, that remind us that innovation often comes with the side of oops, my bad. So before you get cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what craziness I bring to your ears. And hey, leave a comment about the quirkiest invention you've ever heard of. It's always funny to see what the world can conjure up. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that delightful white noise, and settle in comfortably, maybe with a snack. But let's take a pause here. Have you ever pondered what kind of lunatics thought a flying machine made of chicken bones was a good idea? Will we be surprised at just how close people came to homing pigeons being a vital part of telecommunication? Did anyone ever really think rubber horseshoes would keep a horse safe? And here you are, comfortably nestled into your warm couch, while the airship you're about to board could very well collapse like last year's diet plan. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the elements of a Victorian nightmare where every tool is teetering on the edge of absurdity and danger. Buckle up. You might think an invention that saved lives would be uncontroversial, but you'd be wrong. The iron lung, designed for those struck by polio, turned into a form of high-stakes furniture. Picture being strapped into a glorified metal tube, feeling like a human burrito, hoping the manufacturer didn't skimp on the welding. How many people thought they were getting a futuristic nap pod, only to realize it looked more like a torture device from a bad sci-fi flick? Now let's paint the picture of the medical scene in the early 20th century. Hospitals were less sterile sanctuaries and more akin to places where hope went to die, or rather, in the case of polio, to be trapped in an endless game of mechanical couch potato. The iron lung appeared as though aliens were stripping you of your dignity while trying to keep you alive and flirting with industrial design. It looked impressive on the outside, all shiny metal and glowing tubes, ready to rescue its next unfortunate inhabitant. Imagine being a patient that ended up in this contraption. You'd roll in, expecting healing, and end up enclosed in a high-tech sauna that never quite relaxed. With your limbs crammed inside the tubular fortress and your face poking out like a bewildered gopher, you'd contemplate the irony that you'd traded your ability to breathe freely for the promise of mechanical support. Comfort? You'd be more likely to find that in a medieval torture chamber than in a state-of-the-art respiratory machine. Patients often reported feeling claustrophobic, but beyond that, there was the added bonus of feeling helpless every time someone strolled by and gave you that awkward sympathetic nod, as if to say, "Yikes, that must be what it feels like to be a lab rat on a caffeine high." And can we talk about the maintenance staff? You might think they were simply technicians, but in reality, they were more akin to glorified tube wranglers, ensuring your burrito was functioning correctly while you internally screamed at how your lungs are now reliant on machinery. And let's not forget the sound. The relentless chugging and hissing of the iron lung was that of a steam engine on the verge of breaking down, as if at any moment your life support might come crashing down around you with a comedic finale, much like a slapstick routine gone terribly wrong. You'd lay there, trying to focus on breathing with every wheeze, wondering if your next syncopated gasp would be your last performance. Oh, and as if being a human burrito wasn't enough drama for one day, the iron lung also had a knack for turning the most basic human interactions into an Olympic event. Imagine a casual visit from a loved one. It quickly turned into an awkward dance of, how do I lean into this tube without looking like a confused origami project? The romance of a hospital visit vanished faster than a magician's rabbit. Nothing says sexy like a clumsy attempt at a hug through an air supply hose, as it Turns out the iron lung was quite the conversation starter. Stories circulated about people who escaped their dreary tube, or at least they tried to. There were incredible tales of patients doing backflips out of the contraption, only to realise that manoeuvring with a body still recovering from polio and lung issues was less of a graceful leap and more of a clumsy flop. The nurses had significantly more stories to share than they bargained for, creating legends of iron lung heroes who traded their staunch limitations for wild ambitions and recovery milestones. But let's take a moment to appreciate the unsung heroes behind the scenes, the inventors and engineers who birthed the iron lung from their mad, genius-driven ideas. They believed they were paving the way for a world where everyone could someday breathe easily. Unfortunately, their creation often made it feel more like a game of chance played in a metallic coffin. They thought they were helping, but to many patients it felt like they were just stepping up the game in what it meant to be trapped. Understanding the irony of the iron lung isn't a story of villainy, it's one of human spirit and resilience. Despite the discomfort and strangeness, it allowed individuals to survive and breathe when they possibly wouldn't have otherwise. It was the embodiment of mixed results in medical ingenuity, a spectacular blend of hope and bewilderment. Just goes to show, sometimes an invention meant to save lives can also leave you feeling like you're stuck in a metal bear hug that just won't quit. Who knew a piece of medical equipment would prompt more laughter than nightmares in the long run? So here's to the iron lung, that bizarre, beautiful, life-saving invention that epitomizes the chaos of human creativity. May it remind us to embrace the absurd, find beauty in the odd corners of medicine, and treasure the increasingly comfortable life we now lead, one that thankfully doesn't involve being mummified in metal for the sake of our lungs. Let's talk about the death ray, a name that screams serious business. But the only real trouble it caused was in the marketing department. Invented by Nikola Tesla, this weapon was meant to protect you, but mostly it protected your sanity when you realised the inventor couldn't even build a prototype. It's the classic tale of technological ambition meeting the unfortunate reality of not having a direction. Tesla envisioned a beam of energy that could obliterate enemies from a distance, something akin to the ultimate superhero power. Who wouldn't want to zap an adversary from the safety of their own home? But instead of becoming a scene from a sci-fi action movie, Tesla's dreams soon transformed into a mess of machinations, and his proposals left more experts scratching their heads than signing up for secret agent training. Picture it. A world where instead of beefing it up with cramped ships brimming with soldiers, you could merely point a finger and send your foes to oblivion. It was an enticing thought, wasn't it? But the buzz of excited anticipation quickly gave way to the sad realization that Tesla, who was undeniably brilliant, had a knack for grand experiments, but not a great way to realize them. Many considered the death ray a symbol of hope, but it ultimately ended up being closer to the notion of a perpetual motion machine. Appealing, but utterly impractical. You know, like trying to win an arm wrestling match with a spaghetti noodle. Let's fast forward to Tesla's contemporaries, who were a tad skeptical. Some might say they completely lacked faith. Those inventors clung to their steam engines and telephone wires, while Tesla sang sweet songs of energy beams and futuristic warfare. But let's be honest, what's the takeaway? Powerful inventions can often lose traction when the inventor can't quite harness their potential. Imagine putting together IKEA furniture and realizing you've been assembling it backwards all along. Only the world was lacking that instruction manual. Tesla darted around papers, colourful scribbles of theories, diagrams, and elaborate blueprints, featuring tiny doodles of Hulk-like machines. At times, he believed the electromagnetic radiation could ultimately save humanity, or perhaps turn it into intergalactic marshmallows. The death ray was supposed to be a deterrent for war, a nightmare for enemies, and a marvel for allies. Instead, it became another monumental what could have been, drowning in piles of impractical plans and vague conjectures. But hang on, his ideas may have been impractical, but they also turned Tesla into the world's poster child for eccentric inventors. And just as quickly as this death-dealing invention popped into existence, it faded from the limelight, only to bubble back up as a shady meme in the world of conspiracy theories. 'Cause what's a little radiation among friends? But not the kind they're talking about. Thankfully for all of us, the concept of wielding a death ray also opened many minds toward energy-focused research that would one day lead to our actual advancements in laser technology. Who could have thought a convoluted notion could serve as a stepping stone for future nerd sorcery? But here's the kicker. Amid all the ambitious chatter about energy and status quo changes, Tesla ultimately reduced himself to a whimsical character in the minds of the masses, a mad scientist putting on a show instead of the majestic ruler of technology he aspired to be. If only someone had fished through those blueprints and said, "Hey buddy, why not consider refining your original lovely thoughts on electricity for a minute instead?" As history unfolds, Tesla's legacy remains stronger than the very beams he envisioned. The death ray may have been a bust, but as we sit here now, death rays show up in modern cultures as metaphors for the bizarre failures of over-the-top planning. Ever had a death ray on a Friday night, when your brilliant plans took a nosedive over appetizers? Or when your DIY project turned into a tornado of chaos, leaving you contemplating dinner takeout instead? Laughably absurd, Tesla's unfortunate invention reminds us that modernity often builds itself upon the efforts of those imperfect attempts to spark innovation out of thin air. Who knows where we'd be without these misguided pursuits of greatness? And maybe, just maybe, that flickering ambition drives our desires today. The desire to design the impractical in the hope that someday we'll truly illuminate our own futures. So here's to the death ray, a monument to ambition gone hilariously wrong, and a reminder that sometimes the dream may outstrip the technology. Now grab a snack, because we're about to explore the next whimsical misadventure in inventing history. The electric chair made its grand debut as a supposed humane alternative to hanging, but its history's more shocking than the device itself. Literally, imagine being part of the first execution by electric chair, and the poor fella at the switch being just as terrified as the one in the chair. Did they think, "Yikes, moment of truth, folks," as they flipped the switch? Spoiler alert, it never turned out as planned. The first execution in the electric chair happened in New York in 1890, making for quite the show. The lights dimmed, the audience hushed, and a man known as William Kemmler settled into the chair, an unassuming participant on what would turn out to be the worst first date experience conceivable. You see, turning on this so-called humane device didn't just zap him like a TV remote gone haywire. No, it was like witnessing a particularly ungraceful ballet as Kemmler jolted and convulsed for what felt like an eternity, while everyone stammered nervously. The horror escalated, witnesses claiming it looked more like a staged horror show than a dignified end. Not surprisingly, this left quite a mark on people's perceptions of capital punishment. After all, the goal was to make a quick exit, not a convoluted performance worthy of a tragic opera. But let's take a step back and consider how this wild invention came to be. Enter Thomas Edison, who took a hard stance against his rival George Westinghouse. Edison was convinced that AC, alternating current, was the true villainous current, pun absolutely intended, and sought to propagate that belief. In public demonstrations, he turned stray cats and puppies into electrical miniatures of chaos. Hence, the electric chair was born. Edison's campaign was less about ensuring safety and more about making a captivating show, demonstrating, see, this is what happens when you let the wrong current take control. Little did he know, the world would be chuckling about it for centuries to come. Fast forward to the aftermath of Kemmler's less-than-stellar appearance in 1890. The whole ordeal went down so poorly that the chair itself became a morbid punchline. And it wasn't just Kemmler. Each subsequent execution required fine-tuning. Think about the poor fellow operating the switch each time. He needs a support group. "How's that therapy going, Bruce?" "Well, I'm getting better at flipping switches, but my dreams are filled with zapping and convulsions." By the time poor old Roy L. Johnson succumbed to the chair in 1900, everyone assumed it would finally become a seamless process. But over the years, they learned it was a touch more complicated. Like operating a high-stakes game of Jenga, one misstep could lead to hilarious disaster. The chair malfunctioned more times than a three-legged dog at a race, and no one was laughing. Not the onlookers, not the officials, and certainly not the poor sod resigning himself to the whims of electricity. And as if that wasn't enough, drama. Let's talk about the method's terrible PR. Picture a newspaper headline: "Flop recap. Electric chair fails to deliver satisfaction." Not the rousing endorsement they hoped for when introducing the world to electric justice. All sorts of viral memes weren't made back then, but you can bet your bottom dollar that if they had, memes like "the shocking truth of Kemmler" might have caught on. Who wouldn't want to laugh their way through social commentary on a serious topic? As word of the chair's less-than-glorious reputation spread, states began exploring alternatives, and rightly so. After all, if your execution method keeps bombing harder than a bad sitcom, it's time to rethink things. Eventually, that gave rise to methods like lethal injection, which, let's face it, sounds a lot more glamorous than having a seat and getting fried. And just like that, the electric chair's star began to fade, tossed aside like last summer's fashion. So, was the electric chair a revolutionary concept or merely a shocking blunder? It went from the promise of humane execution to historical punchline faster than you can say, "Let's flip the switch." And here you are, nestled in your warm bed, living in an era where the most shocking things are those colourful reality TV moments where nobody actually dies. As you drift off to sleep, remember how fortunate you are to wake up in a time when neither the chair nor its infamous history are part of your life. Good night. Who knew a colourful paint could be a death sentence? Lead paint was all the rage until everyone realised it left more behind than vibrant hues, cognitive decline, illnesses, and a slew of other delightful symptoms. Because who wouldn't want their home decorated with potential brain damage? It turned into a historical game of what colour is your poison. Imagine walking into a house in the early 1900s, vibrant colours gleaming in the sunlight, your senses tingling with joy. "Oh, what a lovely cerulean blue," you might exclaim, "and this sunny yellow is just delightful." All the while, little did you know that these colours could also be nicknamed Scream and Cauldron of Regret. Yes, every brushstroke seemed to shout, "Enjoy this beautiful living space until lead poisoning teeters at your doorstep." Back in the heyday of lead paint's popularity, it was marketed not just as a coating, but as a promise of durability, vibrancy, and magical properties that somehow kept your walls looking fresh and crisp, almost as crisp as a new potato chip. Homeowners believed they were making a fabulous investment. Why settle for dull and drab when you can have colours that pop, even at the risk of having consistently droopy eyelids and a penchant for tripping over shoelaces? The reality kicked in when symptoms began to emerge: headaches, fatigue, and, in children, learning difficulties. Parents started noticing their kids, instead of asking for a bright paint job in the living room, were asking for colour in their lives beyond paint. Research eventually linked lead exposure to what some call the great uninvited guest to cognitive impairment, behavioural problems, and even developmental issues. Well, really, nothing says family fun quite like decorating with a leaded wonderland. Folks were sweating it, whispering doubts while gathering around the dinner table, oblivious to the fact that they had turned their homes into vintage health hazards. As people began to realise that the vibrant homes of the past also held dark secrets, the lead paint industry spun its narrative. They reminded consumers, it's fine, just don't eat the paint chips and you'll be golden. Ironically, a person spending too much time around lead paint felt their brain turning to mush faster than a poorly built soufflé. Think about it. A recipe for home hazard straight out of a bizarre kitchen horror movie dubbed, "My walls are trying to kill me." What did the masses do in reaction? Well, some attempted to ingest the paint in the name of nostalgia, while others opted for creative solutions, like layers of wallpaper hell or covering everything in rugs, thinking, if I can't see the lead, it doesn't exist, right? It was a classic case of ignoring the proverbial elephant in the room, only this elephant was threatening to impale unsuspecting children with its cognitive decline. By the mid-20th century, scientists finally started shouting the truth from the rooftops. Guys, lead paint is bad for you. Who knew all those vibrant colours would eventually resemble a grim reaper of sorts? Enabled by rising consumer demands, some companies scrambled to find alternative solutions and come up with non-toxic paints, reassuring families they could still live stylishly without risking neuroses. Can you imagine a quaint family meeting that began with the children asking, "Did you hear Mama used to paint us in lead?" While Dad slowly backtracked and stated, "Well, that was before we learned how to avoid it, kids." Suddenly, Grandma's advice turned into a morbid cautionary tale. "Back in my day, we just ignored the bad stuff and loved to live vibrant lives," she'd say, waving her hand dismissively. The legacy of lead paint highlights the dark humour in humanity's constantly shifting perspectives on health and safety, a cheerful hue masking a cheeky trick. So, next time you find yourself admiring a lovely wall colour, pause for a moment and wonder, did it come with the promise of joy or a decorator's regret? After all, in the game of a home decor, sometimes the brightest shades leave behind memories you can't wash away. And remember, as you nestle down into your cosy abode filled with safe and vibrant hues, give a nod of gratitude to both progress and the resilience of humanity. Here's to brighter days ahead, where lead is just a distant memory, much like that hairy wallpaper your parents were convinced would make a comeback. Health-conscious individuals thought they'd struck gold when diet soda came on the scene. But little did they know, some sweeteners possibly had them dancing with the devil instead of pursuing wellness. Imagine guzzling what you thought was fabulous, only to be face to face with a gut feeling that doesn't require a nutritionist to affirm, this stuff is like drinking sugar with a side of existential crisis. The lure of 0 calories whispered sweet nothings in the ears of health aficionados who were convinced they had found the magical elixir to quench their thirst without the guilt of traditional soda. It sounded like a fairy tale until those shimmering dreams turned sour. Let's roll back time to the 1960s, a decade that brought us leisure suits and questionable hairdos, and the introduction of aspartame. This innocent-sounding ingredient would soon become the villain in a drama more twisted than your average soap opera. Aspartame was marketed as a miracle sweetener, and suddenly it found its way into everything from fizzy drinks to your grandma's infamous fruit salad that was more syrup than fruit. Consumers thought they were saving the world. But here's a question. How often do you trust a product that's been concocted in a lab and heralded as safe by experts who look like they've spent too much time in white coats? The irony. Diet soda not only gave people an excuse to indulge sans guilt, it became synonymous with glamour. Remember those stylish 1980s commercials featuring spandex-clad, fitness-obsessed figures gracefully sipping their diet sodas while jogging? Meanwhile, the rest of us were over here chugging regular soda like it was a life preserver on the Titanic. Talk about a disconnect. But as we lifted cans towards our lips with renewed optimism, our body said, "Hold up, what's this weird chemical concoction you call food?" Enter side effects that would send shivers down the spines of the brave, headaches, dizziness, and even more horrifyingly the dance of the digestive troubles. The very thing people were pouring down their throats to lose weight was actually setting the stage for even weightier issues. These not-so-merry additives seemed to throw logic out the window. Who knew sugar might be a better option than a science experiment gone awry? You might fancy yourself as someone who enjoys the thrill of pushing boundaries, that experimental living vibe. But when did sipping on your fizzy beige treat mean you were opening a portal to a modern-day witch trial? Imagine being cast out of the yogurt-eating, quinoa bowl-savouring crowd for having a diet soda in hand. "What? You drink that poison?" they'd gasp, clutching their organic cabbage in horror. As the years marched on, reports surfaced about links between these diet drinks and metabolic syndrome and weight gain, sending shockwaves through the soda-loving community. Surely people thought, there must be a good reason. The omnipresent calorie count label surely signalled a healthier alternative. Little did they know, the true toll was tougher on the body than an afternoon spent at the gym trying to outrun a cockroach. In the diet soda revolution, calories became the new monarch of chaos, reigning supreme in shame, confusion and regret. And just when it felt like the diet soda debacle reached a fever pitch, enter the phenomenon of flavouring fatigue. How many flavours can we really create for carbonated water? Peach, watermelon, or let's combine them into a fragrant disaster we call peach melon fizz. It's delightful, they cried, while people poured them down their throats with the overwhelming absurdity of choice. It was as if the beverage industry had become that friend who insists on only hanging out at the weirdest dive bars in town, and you're left trying to pretend your drink doesn't taste like a holiday gone wrong. So here you sit, jittering in your lounge chair, reflecting on the irony of it all. You might have started your love affair with diet soda for a zero-calorie treat, only to slip down the rabbit hole of industry-induced turmoil. And just when you thought you'd conquered the calorie enemy, you discover that in chasing one elusive goal, you inadvertently unleashed a tide of calamity upon your body. So tonight, remember, the journey to wellness should never resemble a roller coaster made from sugar substitutes, and your quest for bubbly bliss might best be served with a splash of cautious realism, soda or not. The Scream Machine, otherwise known as the chillingly named loudspeaker device, was ostensibly designed to awaken those in deep sleep. But imagine a world where waking up wasn't just groggy, but an assault to the senses. It screamed at you louder than your mum at Christmas dinner for forgetting the cranberry sauce. How many nightmares did this thing create? Picture this. You're blissfully dreaming of winning the lottery, maybe even rooming with George Clooney, when suddenly, BAM! A horrific screech erupts from a metal box, shattering the tranquility like a nervous chiming alarm honking at a brunch during a hangover. You bolt upright in bed, flailing like a fish out of water, struggling to orient yourself back into civilization. Mechanisms like this came about during a time when inventors seemed determined to turn mundane waking moments into theatrical spectacles. You have to wonder who the genius behind this idea was. Did he wake up one day and think, You know what people really need is a pre-coffee jolt that feels akin to getting hit by a freight train. It had to sound like a brilliant idea at the time. Let's start the day with a bang. Except that the bang was more like a high-speed chase through a symphony of agitated cats. You'd better believe the neighbours were thrilled. Just imagine a whole household waking up simultaneously to this cacophony. Spouses squabble, pets dash for cover, and toddlers spring out of bed at an unfortunate height, probably soaring through the air like ambitious owls before tumbling back to earth. All around, people would be leaping from their beds, arms flailing like one of those inflatable tube men you see at car dealerships, dancing their way into a day likely far worse than the interrupted dreams they left behind. They say curiosity killed the cat, but in this case, it also may have killed multiple households. Research shows that elderly folks found themselves faced with the grim reality of heart attacks induced by the shock of waking up to this mechanical monstrosity. It's hard to fathom how many people transitioned from peaceful slumbers to catatonic panic just because someone thought waking people up with a battle cry was a sound idea. You can almost hear the caustic Twitter debates of that era. Should we stick to gentle bells or embrace the power of sheer horror? It truly was the clash of the titans, gentle souls versus innovative mayhem, and who could forget the unfortunate mishaps of early adopters experimenting with the volume dial? Picture it. Carl, a state-of-the-art inventor trying to impress his friends with the latest invention. I present to you the Doppler nightmare. Only instead of testing the decibel level cautiously in private, he cranks it to maximum volume while the device was pointed right at the front window. The entire neighbourhood hears its uncanny wail as Carl attempts the great reveal, promptly setting off every canine alarm system within a 2-mile radius. It's hard to tell who was more aghast, Carl's friends or the neighbourhood's alarmed pets. While the loudspeaker had dreams of launching an auditory revolution and making early morning wake-ups an event to remember, its legacy was ambiguous at best. A cautionary tale for would-be innovators everywhere. Sure, it made quite the impression, but it created more screams than waking moments filled with joy. Over time, the sensible world transitioned from loud bursts of madness to softer tones. Enter the gentle alarm clock. Soothing chimes and languid beeps replace the screams, inspiring the realization that sometimes being jolted awake isn't as fun when it resembles the apocalypse. If you think about it, the loudspeaker is one of the greatest unsung heroes of awkwardness. Today, we owe our serene morning hours to its sheer outrageousness. So next time you roll out of bed to the soft trill of your alarm, crack a smile, breathe deeply, and appreciate that you don't have to contend with the sonic chaos of the scream machine. It really is the little things in life, isn't it? Always remember, no invention, no matter how hilariously flawed or tragically unfortunate, goes to waste. They teach us lessons only laughter can provide, allowing humanity to evolve along the way. For centuries, inventors racked their brains over perpetual motion machines, hopelessly clinging to a dream of creating energy without exhaustion. Unfortunately, we have nothing but tales of disappointment and catastrophic failures. This machine was the equivalent of believing your hamster could run a marathon indefinitely. Every sinner and saint trying to problem solve only to end up not solving anything. The pursuit of perpetual motion, once a noble quest, quickly spiraled into a montage of absurdity and slapstick errors that could fill a comedy club on open mic night. Imagine a group of tight-lipped scientists in the 17th century, huddled in dimly lit rooms filled with smoke and the eerie glow of candlelight. They scribbled diagrams, calculated forces, and theorized endlessly. You'd think they were on the verge of a breakthrough, but instead they were more like a medieval version of a tech startup, always pitching the next big thing. only to end up with dusty blueprints and no investors, just existential dread. Did anyone ever stop to ask, hey, while we're trying to defy the laws of physics, how about a warm drink? The irony was not lost on those dabbling in this science fiction. While they dreamed of creating an engine that could run forever without fuel, they found themselves about as successful as a diet soda trying to quench your thirst. Countless designs featured layers of gears, levers and wheels. Throw in a moustache-twirling villain if you're imagining this as a cartoon, and the grand notion of perpetuity went completely off the rails. Picture a contraption with so many moving parts, it was like someone took a grandfather clock, threw in a hamster wheel and said, voila, we've solved energy crises. As you observe from the sidelines, perhaps even sipping your hot drink, one has to laugh at the sheer absurdity. It's like these inventors were the original participants in an intellectual game show titled, Who Wants to Waste Their Life Savings on a Nonsensical Experiment? While some might succeed at making the darn thing turn for more than a few seconds, it never seemed to last, leading to cries of frustration resembling more of a chaotic circus than a scientific endeavour. Did they think, if I just crank this lever a little harder during a full moon, maybe I'll finally break through? One notorious figure in this pursuit was a Frenchman named Joseph Duclos, who crafted a perpetual motion machine that he claimed would not only operate endlessly, but also light his entire home with free energy. To many he was viewed as a genius, others just found him bizarre. Did we mention he demonstrated it during a public fair, waving it around like a flag proclaiming, "Look, my friends, I am the future!" The crowds gathered, mouths agape, only to later disperse when an unattended goat knocked it over. One second promising invention, teetered over by a goat, spiraled down to the unfortunate conclusion that perhaps the laws of physics couldn't be bested that day, at least not without a lot more planning. Fast forward to the modern day and the dreams of perpetual motion revolving around our imaginations have been replaced by the constant buzz of technology. We now have limitless ways to kill time, be it scrolling through mindless videos for hours, or having our smart devices run on good old-fashioned electricity. Somehow, the age-old quest for a self-sustaining energy source became intertwined with the promise of endless cat videos. Who needs a perpetual motion machine when you can stare into the digital abyss of feline antics forever? Moreover, let's consider the irony of this endeavour. While explorers sought to circumvent the laws of thermodynamics, what they really needed was a sturdy workbench, some caffeinated beverages, and perhaps a self-help book on learning to accept one's limitations. After all, instead of fuming over a machine that refuses to comply, better to concentrate on fixing your morning coffee maker. Doing so results in an invention that, while lacking the grandeur of stopping time, does guarantee a strong start to your day. So there you have it. The perpetual motion machine might have been a noble pursuit, but like so many good ideas that never panned out, it's a charade filled with ambition, folly, and that one persistent goat. It remains a charming footnote in the history of invention. A cautionary tale reminding us that what goes up must come down, especially when it's a contraption nobody could quite figure out. Now where's my warm drink? I think I could use one after all that pondering. Did you ever think hair and insects could make a beautiful partnership? Well, the creepy crawly barber did, by employing live bees in a hair-cutting contraption. Yes, you heard right. Not only was your trim uncertain, but you might also walk out buzzing with new ideas. Or, a bee sting fest. How exactly did anyone convince themselves that this was a good idea? Imagine the hair salon of the past, where a friendly barber stood behind a shiny counter cluttered with tools, and oddly enough, a beehive. Instead of the latest hairstyles from a fashion magazine, walk-ins were greeted with a chorus of buzzing bees rather than the smooth sounds of jazz. It was like a horror movie set in a barbershop, a peculiar collision of grooming and nature that could leave a patron wondering if they were getting a haircut or auditioning for a reality show called Beauty and the Bees. But let's break it down. What led to this bizarre invention? In the early days of hairstyling, barbers were not just responsible for scissors and clippers, they were the local healthcare providers too. Yes, they pulled teeth, treated wounds, and dispensed advice that frequently sounded more like folklore than medical wisdom. Somewhere along the way, someone concluded that the soothing hum of bees would promote relaxation during one's self-care ritual, or provide that bit of buzz most people look for when visiting a salon. The concept appeared ingenious on the surface. Beeswax was used as a styling product, offering shape and hold, but getting it directly from the source. That was next-level thinking. Can you imagine sitting in that barber's chair draped in a cape as the barber philosophy detailed how the magic of bees could transform a bad hair day into something resembling a nature documentary? And here you see, this is how we create the perfect buzz cut. And one thing's for certain, bees certainly had a strong opinion about who should have the coolest cut in town. Now, let's have a little fun with the practicalities, shall we? Picture this. You're well into your appointment, and it's all smooth sailing until one of the bees decides that your ear is a perfect landing strip. Suddenly, you're swatting and flailing around like a contestant on a bad game show, two guys wearing aprons holding you down while trying to finish your haircut. Just breathe. It can't hurt that bad. They're just excited to meet you. Might be the barber's attempt at reassurance. But if you're one of the many who happen to be mildly allergic to bees, it really was a case of good luck with that. Of course, the gold standard of hairstyling would eventually evolve. When people caught wind of the bee debacle and realised that buzzing away didn't always mean a fresh do, they swiftly moved on to less problematic alternatives. But there's something wonderfully absurd that makes you scratch your head while swatting imaginary bees, thinking about those days when stylists believed collaboration with insects was the way forward. Historical records show that beekeeping had its own beauty traditions, but the fusion here really takes the honey cake. In a twist of fate, the creepy crawly barber left behind quite the legacy. While we don't rush to make appointments with insect-inspired salons today, you might still find the occasional trendy barbershop offering bee-themed specials. Although we can assure you they don't involve the buzz of live insects. They probably take a cue from that weird invention and add honey to hair products or promote bee-friendly practices, clearly softer on the consumer than a colony of annoyed bees. But what can we learn from this extraordinary appeal to our more adventurous selves? Maybe it's that creativity in hairstyling has always thrived on the bizarre, or perhaps that while we've long moved away from live insects being our beauty partners, there's something wonderfully quirky about letting nature mingle with the mundane. Let's be honest, if it means one more hairdresser using natural products, then maybe bee-inspired haircuts can exist in some unintended way, bringing back a hint of nature to our everyday to-do lists without the threat of significant sting-related casualties. In the end, everyone made it out of those buzzing barber chairs alive, hopefully without too many stings to tell the tale. While the concept of the creepy crawly barber may not grace our modern salons, it paved the way for a resilient spirit of innovation, one which hilariously reminds us that looking good sometimes requires a touch of madness. So the next time you sit in a haircut chair, just remember, no buzzing bees, please. We all know that air pollution is a bad thing, but how about inhaling through a tube of noxious gases? The noxious gases of the 1930s were designed to pump joy and vitality into tired souls struggling with the malaise of modern life. Because if you can't breathe deeply, why not experience life through gassy clouds of fumes that might also expedite your inevitable demise? A delightful experience indeed. Imagine, if you will, a parlour tucked away in corners of city streets where the idle rich gathered to sip on a concoction of overpriced trendy beverages, while the faint scent of sulphur lurked in the air like a confused teenager at a high school dance. A radiant sign greeted passers-by. Breathe life into your day. Underneath, a warning label read, "Side effects include dizziness, shortness of breath, and possibly losing the will to live." Just the sort of slogan that would put you at ease, right? The ad calls out to you from the street like a siren song, promising elation with every whiff. And let's face it, when you spend the day under fluorescent lights, rethinking all your life choices and questioning how many forms of processed cheese count as a balanced diet, who wouldn't want to try something as ludicrous as this? What exactly went into these gases? A delightful blend of substances that certainly wouldn't be passed under a health inspector's nose today. Take, for instance, the original formula, which included a delicious mix of carbon monoxide, lead, and an assortment of other chemicals that didn't exactly sing harmoniously under scrutiny. Patients were lured in with promises of improved focus and vitality. In other words, maybe you could finish that novel you've been avoiding or finally clean your grimy attic, provided you survive the treatment. You step into the chamber, and suddenly it feels like you've entered an exaggerated cartoon version of a 1930s sci-fi movie, where people giddily bounced off the walls as their lungs filled with the toxic concoction. But little did they know, some might just end up bouncing straight out of the picture. Let's take a moment to reflect on the average customer. Picture that excitable fellow, let's call him Ted, making his way down the street with a skip in his step. Ted had just finished his 9-to-5 grind at the local rubber factory, and boy did he need a pick-me-up. Feeling sluggish? The gasser is just a skip away. With a whole $1 in his pocket, it was the 1930s after all, Ted plops down on the plush, suspiciously sticky couch in the waiting area. He offers up his cash for what he hopes will be a miracle cure, little knowing that instead he would cease to be plain old Ted and ascend to the man who embraced his demise. It's a classic hold my beer moment, though we all know none of those drinkers ever came back with a coherent story. But don't get me wrong, the noxious gases had their loyal fans. The loyalists treated the experience like the hottest trend, lighting up their friends with the tale of their latest adventure through the mysterious inhalation chamber. Madge, you've got to try it. I heard it makes your hair shinier and gives you the energy of 1,000 caffeinated lemurs. They certainly live for the moment. Maybe they just wanted an excuse to avoid discussing their day jobs for the next hour or so. The gasser craze made enough headlines that soon even the scientists began weighing in with excited rants about respiratory innovation. Health professionals couldn't hold back. They jumped into the ring, waving pamphlets explaining why inhaling noxious gases was anything but beneficial. So, here comes the dilemma. If inhaling the fumes was the equivalent of underwater basket weaving, unfashionable and excruciatingly pointless, then how were they making a spectacle out of it? In what realm did pouring hazardous particles into your lungs sound like an improvement? Sadly, the noxious gases eventually met their well-deserved demise around the late 1930s, showing that public opinion may not have been as aligned with getting a buzz from toxic fumes as expected. A few years later, the noxious gases faded from society's grasp, leaving behind nothing more than the memories of a bizarre moment in history. These questionable machines ultimately serve as a comedic reminder that not all inventions are created equal, and sometimes progress can take a nosedive, but at least it will be a memorable one. There must have been a wild time when spear guns became the next hot thing in hunting. Intended for thrilling deep-sea adventures, they often led to accidents more common than fish on Fridays. Have you ever tried to pull a spear out of your foot while still looking cool? Spoiler, it doesn't work, and there's an adage for every fisherman who went out more skewered than his catch. Imagine keen hunters heading out, all decked out in their gear, confidence soaring like a rogue seagull, only to plummet dramatically upon an unexpected accident. Picture this. It's a lovely Saturday morning, and you're at the marina, taking in the scent of salt water and sunscreen while simultaneously regretting the night's bachelor party. Your friends hand you a spear gun, insisting this will be a transformative outing. As you load it, the cautious 80s dad inside you hollers, "Is this safe?" But never mind that, you push that voice down, determined to channel your inner Poseidon, king of the sea. Little do you know, Poseidon was just waiting with his popcorn in hand for the chaos about to unfold. First, there's that moment of anxiety when you accidentally drop your spear gun into the water. Don't worry, it hasn't sunk yet. You dive in with the grace of a flailing swan, only to emerge sputtering as you wrench the gun back onto the boat. Unfortunately, you've inadvertently ignited a fresh wave of humour among your crew who are specialising in snarky commentary. Congratulations, you're not just the fisherman, but now the Valentine's Day mascot. Definitely not where you envisioned yourself yesterday. Setting sight on the magnum opus of marine life, you take a deep breath, aim, and let that spear fly. In your dreams, it's a flawless shot, but in reality, it embarks on a tragic trajectory, burrowing itself right into your buddy's cooler instead of the prized fish. There's that moment of collective silence before your crew bursts into laughter. "Way to go, Aquaman," they holler. Not that you should have expected anything less from a bunch of besties who signed up for spontaneous madness. But wait, the plot thickens. As everyone laughs, you decide to redeem yourself. You grab another spear. The stakes feel high now. This time, you aim lower, like your self-esteem as you eye that wiggle-waggle fish below. You take your shot, but, in a movie-worthy slow-motion moment, you accidentally pull the trigger while adjusting your stance. Wham! In seized panic, you forget all about safety, and boom! The spear whizzes past you, becoming a latent predator in the sea of seas. What would the fish think? He was so close, but now he's gone. As the chaos overtakes the boat, the reactions fly faster than a dolphin diving for fish. "Quick! Call the Coast Guard!" one shouts, while another realises they've just let you steer the boat while unsupervised. You dive in embarrassment while they jostle to take a video of your excellent diving to dodge an embarrassing situation act. By now, who needs dinner? You've just unwittingly reinvented the art of spearfishing into slapstick comedy. The boat begins to rock violently as everyone teeters back and forth, limbs flailing and fists distracting any measured aim. Somewhere in the frenzy, you gasp for air, fully aware you've become both the life of the party and the butt of an uprising narrative all at once. You silently revise your fisherman's resume to include bad aim and legendary self-deprecation. At the end of it all, you emerge, muddied, possibly still bearing signs of battle, that elusive snag in your foot, giving your friends the perfect punchline for their lives. But you know, standing there with the engine purring beneath the setting sun, clad in enough bruises and tales to fill your next fishing trip with lore, you can't help but laugh along as the tragic yet comedic saga keeps unravelling in your mind. Your relationship with the ocean may never be the same, but it'll certainly be one for the books. So, should you ever encounter a spear gun, perhaps take a moment, be aware of the power it wields, not just the capacity for fishing, but the unrivalled potential to stitch together moments neither you nor your friends will dare forget. Who knew that catching dinner could come with a twist? It's just another day on the water, where the only guarantee is some degree of unintended hilarity, and possibly a trip to the ER for good measure. Automated torture devices in the Middle Ages turned into Twilight Zone-esque horrors, designed in a world where not even the greatest inventors could refute the sheer chaos of their creation. It was like someone sat around a table sipping mead and thought, "You know what would make life grander? machines that make us bleed. Those contraptions may have been innovative, but so were the nightmares they conjured. Seriously, one could imagine a group of inventors in long robes and pointy hats huddled together in a dark chamber, scribbling madly about gadgets that would put a dentist's office to shame. Picture for a moment the infamous Iron Maiden. This was no dainty maiden in a flowing gown. Instead, she was a jagged monstrosity fashioned to look like a beautiful human figure, complete with tiny deadly spikes lining the interior. They say it was designed to gently embrace. Ever wonder how awkward conversation would get? So, how was your day? Mine was smooth until I had a rather close encounter with that lovely lady over there. No, thank you. Her spikes weren't exactly designed with comfort in mind either. Anyone unfortunate enough to experience this hug quickly learned that it was the last friendly cuddle they had ever receive. And if you think that's bad, let's talk about the rack. No, not the kind you're imagining for your clothes. It was a device aimed at literally stretching its victims until they were tauter than a new guitar string. Prisoners would be tied down on the rack, and with every crank of the handle, their limbs would stretch further apart. It was as if someone took the concept of yoga to an extreme level, one where your final savasana would be a fitting farewell rather than serenity. I can just see the promotional poster. Introducing the rack, now available at your local medieval fortress. Because who doesn't want to find their inner flexibility while questioning their life choices? Now, the term medieval creative energy certainly ring true with the chair of torture. This delightful contraption boasted a fiery feature that made it look like the latest in horror movie chic. Picture it, someone strapped into a wooden chair with the unfortunate honour of being sentenced to roast. Instead of being rehabilitated, however, they'd roast in the name of punishment. It's like inviting someone over for dinner and serving them a plate of "Oops, I forgot to turn off the oven." If you wanted a real-life oven-baked horror story, this was the appliance to pick, although you really shouldn't try this at home. Ever heard of the Judas Cradle? What a charming name. It sounds like a vintage toy you'd find in a quaint market, but in actuality it was a pointy device for the wickedest of unique punishments. The victim would be lowered onto a pyramid-like structure, and let's just say that those little points were not designed for a peaceful landing. Is this a punishment or a visit to a medieval spa gone wrong? Either way, it had the charm of a haunting lullaby but was decidedly less soothing. And of course, who could forget about the brazen bull, a fiery chamber that could turn a torturous experience into a full-blown barbecue? This peculiar invention was literally a bull-shaped structure that housed a fire below and was used to roast victims alive while their screams were heard inside. While the thought of grilling is often associated with summer cookouts, history might suggest otherwise. It's where your day with friends suddenly turns nightmarish, and folks realise they're not just planning dinner, they're planning a reenactment of their worst fears. Automated torture devices are the epitome of creativity gone terribly wrong. Each one tells a bizarre tale of human invention gone haywire amidst the giggles and inebriation of a society that found a twisted sense of humour in suffering. They embody an era when morbid curiosity, coupled with lots of mead, could compel people to think, what if we built this legendary contraption to inflict maximum distress? The sheer gall of these ideas might have had the inventors chuckling from their nearby taverns, while victims experienced their very own horror movies unfolding in real time. One must wonder what came before such insanity. Was it really the quest for innovation, or just pure, unfiltered chaos squashed together in a few brain cells? So tonight, raise a glass to the fruits of misguided inventions, where creativity and horror met at their clashing junction of madness. Because if there's anything these devices have taught us, it's that sometimes progress comes with a wicked price, and perhaps Just maybe, some ideas should stay on the drawing board, or better yet, banished to the pages of a ridiculous history book. Let me know when you'd like me to continue, or if you have specific instructions for the next part. Bulletproof vests were intended to save lives, but what happens when they instead become a stage for let's make it fashion? Designed to shield, but often met with the reality of making everyone feel like a superhero, albeit with a hefty price tag. Was it really a good idea to make it mandatory for every wannabe vigilante running after a bad guy? Yes, but only until the first round of gunfire. Imagine strutting down the street in your brand new bulletproof vest, feeling like a cross between an action movie star and a balloon animal. You know, the kind of outfit that screams I'm prepared for anything. Until, of course, you realise this fashionable armour could lead you to be an unintended casualty of fabric and unfortunate design choices. These vests were initially made of heavy materials that feel more like a bear hug from a grizzly than any sort of life-saving gear. Now you might wonder what it felt like to wear one of these contraptions. The sensation? A delightful blend of claustrophobia and exaggerated masculinity. Remember, when you're wearing a bulletproof vest, it's not just about protection, it's about making a statement, like walking into a party with the enthusiasm of a coffee-fueled jackrabbit while weighing as much as an above-average toddler. Unfortunately, you're probably doing the vest-wearing shuffle, a bizarre waddle that says, I'm totally equipped to fight crime, assuming I can make it to the donut shop before my knees buckle. As these vests evolved, so did the absurdity surrounding them. The market expanded from practical applications into high-fashion territories. An alarming trend emerged where celebrities and socialites sported designer bulletproof vests on red carpets. Can you imagine the conversation on the way into the Met Gala? Darling, this vintage armour is great for dodging bullets at award shows, but can you believe its weight almost knocked me over? At least I also repelled a few feeble photo ops with that last-minute pose. It was all about finding the right angle, right? Let's not forget that the irony deeply rooted in this fashion parade was palpable. Societal fears were rising, and the response came in the form of high-end couture. Forget about solving the root problems of violence in urban settings. Spreading the idea that wearing a designer vest would shield you from danger seemed a more palatable situation. It was the start of the armoured revolution famously known as look good, feel good, but don't get shot. Hardly a viable life philosophy. History offers some tragic notes, though. During the early 20th century, when vests were climbing into everyday use, they didn't always save lives. Unlike their slick modern counterparts, the first iterations looked more like oversized aprons made from thick, layered fabric. One wrong move in the wrong neighbourhood, and you might as well have strapped a target on your back. Use of these vests sometimes resulted in ironic outcomes, sending the well-meaning wearer straight to the hospital. Any well-versed couch historian can tell you that World War I heralded the birth of the modern bulletproof vest, designed to keep soldiers safe from pesky enemy fire. But rather than proving an all-encompassing solution, these early models often turned out to be more ceremonial than functional. The result? An army battalion sporting body armour that weighed as much as an overpacked suitcase, leaving participants panting on the battlefield. Did anyone develop an exercise regimen alongside? Jogging in place sounds less intimidating when you've got vest sweat pouring down your brow like rainwater cascading off a tired roof. By the time we reached modern-day vests, technological advancements allowed for lighter materials. Think Kevlar. The promise of protection and comfort transformed how law enforcement and military personnel approached their jobs. But the key takeaway was often humorous. You spend so much on fitting the newest prototype, and rumour has it your asking price is still cheaper than a lifetime of therapy sessions addressing your newfound body image crisis. All in all, the evolution of bulletproof vests reveals much about the motivations of society. What started with a worthy notion to promote safety spiraled into a fashion statement filled with contradictions. No one expects to find themselves at a gala stomped by armoured ware while making casual small talk about how last year's model really doesn't fit as snugly as they advertised. And while we can chuckle at the wild trajectory these vests took from battlefield to runways, the reality remains. Somehow, in a world obsessed with fashion, you still run the risk of being a walking punchline, and just like that, you may be stuck in the punchline of history. Mysterious medications from the past, believing that if a little does good, a lot must do better. Enter the realm of mercury and opium elixirs that some considered cures. It turns out large doses pretty much meant setting a party theme called Disaster Awaits. Did anyone realise they were basically playing doctor with a flair for the absurd? It was a popular way of losing their minds. Now imagine stepping into a pharmacy during the 1800s, or rather, a dimly lit apothecary where scents of dried herbs mingled with something less savoury, like the reeking waft of untested concoctions that beg the question, what on earth is in that bottle? There you'd find well-meaning individuals, perhaps amidst a swirl of tobacco smoke and questionable hygiene, eager to prescribe you a potion filled with just a pinch of powdered mercury. Because who doesn't want to ingest the first cousin to poison in order to stabilise a fever, right? Take opium, for instance. For centuries, this golden elixir was heralded as the cure-all, the magical fix for everything from headaches to heartbreaks. If you had the sniffles, opium. If you lost your job, opium. If your in-laws were on their way over, high time for a little opium-based tincture. And there was no need for pesky modern-day ethics. Administer it to children without a second thought. After all, who couldn't use a little calm down and float away into the ether remedy when their favourite toy breaks? But let's backtrack to Mercury, the real rock star of this pharmaceutical horror show. Used to treat syphilis and a variety of ailments, it was a curious element that most folks just didn't recognise as dangerous. Have you ever tasted a spoonful of quicksilver? Spoiler alert, if you haven't, you shouldn't. It was as if your general practitioner, we call them doctors now, but whatevs, had just returned from a long trip through the Book of Absurdity. Surely that must be it. Did they think, I could really go for some shiny liquid metal today? That'll help with everything. Patients soon realised that while they may have walked into the apothecary with a cold, they left with symptoms far worse than before, like chronic hair loss and a suspicious penchant for decadent dinner parties to celebrate their slow decline into madness. You see, large doses of mercury weren't just a few bad days. It often led down a slippery pathway to a wider array of fatal misfortunes. For every reason a patient had for pursuing this treatment, there were 3 fun side effects no one mentioned, like lead poisoning-like symptoms, or an uncontrollable desire to shout, "I'm a canary," in crowded rooms, a shockingly unhelpful addition to social interaction. Soon, tales of anyone daring to try these concoctions leaped into every gossiping mouth from the taverns to the squares, where locals admitted to going partially mad after experiencing hallucinations. "You must drink this," they urged, handing over a vial promising glorious relief as if it were their mother's homemade jam. But instead of sweet relief, they found, perhaps, a bag of suspicious green liquid that made them see flying elephants instead. Enter the wizards of modern pharmaceuticals, who built their careers on analysing all the data left over from these esoteric experiments. "Oh, you thought it would work," they said, tapping their glasses. Yes, indeed, a legacy of medical misadvents gave them quite the rationale to push for legit science. Turns out our ancestors dropped a spell on the wrong part of the apothecary shelf. Thanks to our dear medicinal innovators, these historical blunders shaped the groundwork for rigorous testing and ethical standards. So remember that the next time you consider self-medicating with anything you find in your grandmother's medicine cabinet, better safe than sorry, right? So here you are today, equipped with the wisdom of centuries, thankful to live in an age where you wouldn't dare dose yourself with a spoonful of happiness labelled as mercury tonic. But let's give a toast to the madness of medicine, the brave souls who sailed the absurd waters of their healing dreams, grit teeth on the absurdity, swung wildly at solutions, and paved the way for the glorious prescriptions we now enjoy today. And in doing so, they contributed to the twisted yet fascinating saga of mysterious treatments that once took centre stage in the theatre of medicine. Aren't you glad you can comfortably recline in your armchair with a glass of mainstream medicine, sipping it all in rather than hanging on the proverbial ledge of a potion-blending genius from yesteryear? Now that's progress we can all appreciate. Dyed to death, toxic fashion. Dyeing fabrics in beautiful colours doesn't usually spell doom. However, that was before we started rolling with arsenic and other questionable chemicals. People thought they were fashionable while unknowingly playing a long game with liver failure. What a surprise twist. Who knew your vibrant purple dress could be your downfall and clearance sale item all at once? Just imagine strutting down the street, feeling like $1,000,000 in that bright colour, blissfully unaware that you might as well be wearing a sign that says, "I accept my fate." Let's set the scene in the 19th century, a time when colour was king, and society as a whole was obsessed with turning dull, drab fabrics into a kaleidoscope of hues. The brighter, the better. What people didn't realise was that behind every stunning shade lurked a sinister secret. Take, for example, the brilliant colour Shields green, a vibrant pigment that was perfect for those chic ball gowns. What they didn't disclose at the fabric store was that it was laced with arsenic, the same element found in poison bottles. It's like asking for a double shot of espresso and getting a side of rat poison instead. All that glitters is definitely not gold, and those who choose sumptuous silks were no safer. The textiles were tinted with dyes made from coal tar, which came with a side order of potential fire hazards and health risks that would make you think twice before throwing a fabric party. You might say, "I'll risk the armpit stink just to look fabulous." But were you fully prepared to rummage through a pile of fabric that could very well combust at any moment, sending you into a medieval-influenced horror show before you even made it to the gala? Now, let's dig deeper into the realm of our fashion icons, those daring, dapper souls who embraced these outlandish colours as a mark of their wealth. They wore their shades with pride, attending soirees and elegant soirees, all while the guests complimented each other on their glorious garb. What they were trading in, however, was their health for the sake of what they believed was high society. Little did they know that their unexpected accessory, chronic illness, was always lurking around the corner like that one cousin who only shows up at the family reunion to eat the last piece of cake and stir the pot. You have to wonder, who was the first person to roll up to the ball wearing this poisonous attire? Did they walk in, spin around in their arsenic-laden fabric and think, "Yes, darling, they'll simply die for my look," then get swept away by the realization that death might be more than just a fashionable metaphor? It's ironic because they were spicing up an otherwise dull existence only to find themselves in a fashion victim exhibit. Even manufacturers weren't entirely in the dark. Turns out they were simply more concerned about the profit margins than the potential toxic aftertaste of their creative decisions. You see, vibrant colours meant sales, and sales meant money. How could they resist the siren call of vivid hues, knowing full well that women across the country were inhaling toxins with every breath at their sewing machines? Voila! Fashion turned out to be a double-edged sword, sharp enough to give you a paper cut and faint at the same time. As this trend carried on, the death count inadvertently became the elephant in the room. Between colourful gowns and polka dot skirts, questions started emerging about why so many women seemed to take unexplained sick days, or why unexpected fatalities became eerily common. The answer was always the same, lurking beneath the seams. These toxic dyes were embodying a quiet yet extremely deadly revenge. It seems, in the grand scheme of things, fancier fabric attracted maladies like flies to honey, morphing the term fashion statement into fashion catastrophe. Eventually society awoke to the grim reality of their wardrobe choices, leading to sweeping reforms in dye production, and for a while, vibrant colours chilled out. But let's not forget the lesson too easily. History might have moved on, but behind every trendy fabric lies a potentially deadly secret. What a twist! It's like finding out your favourite childhood game is actually a horror plot. You loved the colour, but sadly, that vivid hue was a gateway to your demise. So next time you reach for something bright and eye-catching, just remember, with great colour comes great responsibility, and possibly a side of eternal regret. Who knew wearing a rainbow could turn into a grim reminder of the toxic risks we still grapple with today? Fashion may no longer have the same poison potential, but the memory of those colourful lessons will linger, reminding us that while colouring outside the lines is fun, sometimes it's best to stay clear of the toxic trends of the past. Radioactive goodies were once marketed like candy burritos, bringing a glow to your life while also ensuring you glowed in the dark, for all the wrong reasons. Imagine chowing down on some delectable treats only to light up like a neon sign. There's nothing like a good candy bar that could also act as a glow stick, right? Or, a one-way ticket to regrettable decisions. Back in the early 20th century, the allure of radioactivity was all the rage. Considered a miracle cure for ailments ranging from sluggishness to a penchant for lethargic afternoons spent binge-watching TV, oh, how things have changed. Innovators dreamed up all kinds of applications for this trendy scientific phenomenon, and someone in the candy business had the bright idea to add radioactive materials like radium to their sugary concoctions. Forget about the healthy snacks we have today. These glowing candies promised an experience no dentist would endorse. You could buy your sugar high and glow like a disco ball simultaneously. One of the standout products was the Radiant Creams. Picture a chocolate-covered treat designed to give you a jolt of energy, laced with exotic but potentially lethal radium. Just imagine diving into a bag of these beauties at a midnight snack, while wondering if your thighs were suddenly expanding or if you could actually see your bones becoming luminous. Gulp. Now, it's important to address the odd health benefits people supposedly experienced while indulging in these brightly coloured glowy delights. Consumers raved about increased energy levels, vivid dreams, and a vibrant complexion that set them apart in the morning coffee runs. Little did they know that the glowing hue was largely due to the radium seeping into their systems like an unwanted houseguest. Ever had a friend crash at your place, only to realise they never left? Not even after a glowing experience at breakfast that sent them running to the ER. In a time when scientific understanding was less than satisfactory. You mean we write things down and no one reads them? The manufacturers of these radioactive treats were expertly dodging responsibility. Promotional slogans like "a healthy glow from within" left many consumers unaware that they were signing up for an unconventional death sentence. The signs of radiation sickness went undetected for far too long. Symptoms range from hair loss to spontaneous bursts of charisma, which, let's be honest, weren't all that great in moderation. But let's not pretend these treats didn't become a sensation. Imagine kids running down the street with glowing tongues, shouting, "Look, Mom, I'm a walking glow stick." Dinner parties turned vibrant, with hosts serving radioactive confections paired with organically sourced wines. There was little concern over long-term effects. After all, who wouldn't want to be the life of the party with a tantalizing treat? Who needed a strobe light when you could? Just bring a few of these candies to the mix. It wasn't long before the consequences began to surface. Survivors of the glowing craze started seeking medical advice after suffering from serious ailments that befell their once vibrant lives. Radium poisoning began to emerge as not just an absurd Facebook poll question, but real-world consequences. Those delightful candies quickly morphed from party masterpieces into a cautionary tale. The realization that your sugar rush might also yield weakened bones and a macho glow-in-the-dark skin was not exactly what the manufacturer had advertised. Eventually, laws began to change, and regulating candy became a public safety measure, and believe it or not, candy companies were forced to part ways with their glowing goodies. Consumers were shocked, like discovering your hot chocolate was actually brewed with expired milk. Who knew treating yourself with a desirable candy could also lead to a sudden breakdown in health? Never forget that treat streaming from the depths of potential doom. So the lesson here, always check the ingredients, and if you find glow under the listed active ingredients, consider trading it in for something a bit less luminous. Perhaps a non-radioactive chocolate chip cookie instead, or even a good old carrot. Though who has time for that? After all, they don't glow and don't offer an unforgettable party trick. But at least you won't wake up in a glow-in-the-dark haze contemplating the choices that led you down this path filled with regret. The next time you see that pristine candy wrapper shining under the light, or assuming you're unable to see it, you know it's best to stick to treats free of extra ingredients. Let's face it, your dentist will thank you. The vacuum cleaner was designed to free your home from unwanted dirt, but early models were infamous not just for sucking up dirt, but lives with reckless abandon. You could practically hear them whispering, "The carpet must not only be clean, but your life must also disappear when I show up." Who knew cleaning could feel more like an execution? Imagine waking up one morning to tackle the dust bunnies that have turned your lovely abode into a scene from a horror film, only to find you're locked in a power struggle with a mechanical monster. These early vacuums were hardly the sleek, convenient machines of today. Picture a contraption that resembles a rejected Transformer toy, assembled from heavy metal parts and sporting a hose thicker than your arm. And then there was the unholy noise. Each pull of the cord set off a chainsaw-like roar, as if a banshee was being dragged to the afterlife with every inch you attempted to clean. Your ancestors probably believed there was a demon hiding in the machine, ready to rip the soul from your unsuspecting carpet. Speaking of carpets, can we take a moment to reflect on the carpets themselves? Back then, you didn't just have light, fluffy carpeting that caressed your toes. No, sir! You had thick, tangled monstrosities composed of enough fibres to make a sheep clutch its heart. Sure, they looked cosy, but if you lost a sock or a small child within its depths, that was on you. No rescue team could navigate the forest of pills, crumbs, and who knows what, and the vacuum was far more interested in swallowing whatever poor soul had wandered in. And there was the unfortunate issue of suction. Most modern vacuums feature gentle suction settings, perfect for your hardwood floors or delicate curtains. But the early models? You might as well have been trying to extract black holes from the carpet. If you weren't careful, you could end up with anything from your prize-winning potted plant to liverwurst sandwiches lost to history. In fact, how many people thought their loyalty to their vacuum would save them, only to watch helplessly as it devoured the sofa cushions whole? Not to mention the hazards that came with running such a beast. The vacuum cleaner was not just cleaning your home, it was a ticking time bomb for ineffable grief. Have you ever been caught in the act of vacuuming, yanked into a dance of misfortune when that thick cord got snagged on furniture? Suddenly you're the reluctant lead in an impromptu interpretive dance on how to not break an ankle, while the vacuum chases after you, an animated form of chaos and regret, Who thought a simple cleaning tool could morph into your arch nemesis, complete with slaughterous ambitions and intentions? But let's address the real issue. The appliance was so heavy and clunky that simply lifting it could breathe life back into your muscle strain. After finishing your cleaning spree, you'd be left with muscles sore and grit collected in unseen nooks and crannies, conveniently not mentioned in the instruction manual. And of course, if you did manage to get it to cooperate, there was always the fear of the dreaded clog. One moment you're hopeful and optimistic, the next, the machine gives a pathetic wheeze before an anxiety-inducing series of sputters, leaving you somewhere between a frustration-fueled rage and desperation to get the job done. Did you really sign up for vacuuming or some sort of surreal endurance challenge? Eventually, the vacuum cleaner matured into the refined, lightweight beauty we know today. It shrank down to the size of a small puppy, now features multiple settings for all types of surfaces, and even has the audacity to be self-propelling. Yet bewilderingly, while it became socially and technologically progressive, the memory of those initial monsters, those terrible harbingers of desperation, still lingers as a cautionary tale. So perhaps the next time you hoover around your home, you should pause in reverence for those brave souls of the past who were caught in a tug of war between sanitary aspirations and horrific machinery. After all, when it comes to the vacuum of doom, the carpet may be clean, but history is never free of dirt. Safety pins were invented to keep clothing in check, but did anyone mention that people were inadvertently being impaled by these tiny torture devices? It was the early 19th century fashion statement that had you simultaneously feeling chic and a little like Swiss cheese. Who decided these probably shouldn't be included in a beauty regime, huh? These pokey little implements were sold as a simple solution to a common problem. Unruly fabric wreaking havoc on one's silhouette. Unfortunately, it turns out that giving a sharp piece of metal access to your garments and then your body can lead to much more than just style. Let's take a quick journey back to the time when safety pins ruled the fashion domain. The Industrial Revolution had taken off, and with it, the rise of ready-to-wear clothing systems resulted in garments that didn't quite fit the average person. Enter the safety pin, swooping in like a cape-wearing hero, promising to hold fabrics together and keep everything in place. But was that truly the case? Let me set the scene. You're getting dressed for a lovely evening out. You pop a safety pin into your waistband to avoid any slippage, only to discover the pin has now become a modern metaphor for a surprise betrayal. And not just a tiny puncture, but a full-throttle surprise. Your outfit is now a weapon. Picture this. It's a Sunday evening at a quaint Victorian ball. You're dancing elegantly, swirling your skirt while trying to look like an effortless debutante, when suddenly your beautiful dress goes rogue. The safety pin you so confidently placed in your waist has decided to feast on your delicate skin, and now you're left reenacting a scene from a Shakespearean tragedy. To be or not to be, pinched. You carefully dodge the dance floor, but with every step the pin shimmies, just like your dignity, as you realise that high fashion might come with very real dangers. Ever seen someone attempt to maintain their poise while discreetly yanking at their dress with one hand and performing an awkward tango with the other? It's quite the sight. Now let's talk about the social ramifications. Safety pins became an accessory, a status symbol of sorts. It's as if people were saying, "Look at my meticulously pinned skirt. I can bear the pain and still be fabulous." But the truth is, this love affair with safety pins resulted in a veritable minefield of fashion faux pas. Have you ever tried to adjust your outfit in a public restroom? That just adds to the excitement, right? A simple yank transforms into a complicated extraction mission. Do you take a deep breath, face the cruelty of fate, or simply risk a permanent life-altering scar because you wanted to look cute during a late-night outing. And then, of course, there were the dangers of dual-purpose pins. One minute you're traversing a crowded street feeling confident and chic. The next moment, your garment gets caught, perhaps on your dear friend's jacket. It happens. You go to free yourself, but alas, the safety pin has staged a revolt, transforming into a hook designed to ensnare your flesh just as much as your skirt. You start to wonder if the safety pin stages its own coup against humanity. Ha! You thought I was a reliable tool? Welcome to the deadly underbelly of fashion. At some point, one could even speculate about safety pin sabotage. What if they were invented by an underutilized seamstress trying to convince those around her that no one needed practical pockets? Why would you when you could have nails stabbing you every time you reach for the last bite of cheese at an elegant soiree? Does fashion really need a call your doctor moment? In retrospect, you can't help but ask, did they know? Were the inventors having a laugh, imagining sophisticated gentry nicknamed the pin of the masses while revelling in the horror? The irony seems too delicious, doesn't it? The beloved safety pin transitioned from being a mere fabric fastener to a symbol of confused bravery. I look fantastic, but also, perhaps I need to consider investing in some plaster, just in case. As history barreled forward, the safety pin led to some pretty nifty advancements in fasteners and closures, duct tape included. But for a while, it was the poke in the side that made you laugh and cry simultaneously. It reminds us all that fashion can be a wild beast, and those tiny devices designed to hold it all together might just be the rascally troublemakers in our decorative endeavours. With a hard lesson learned, you can always keep a sense of humour about it, even when you're wearing your chic Swiss cheese look as a badge of honour. So let's raise a glass for those brave souls who dared to swagger in their safety pin-laden wardrobes, painfully chic, yet undeniably courageous pioneers of fashion. Gas masks were designed to keep you breathing clean air in times of war, but when they actually made you look like a mutant monster walking into a rave, it became quite the internal conflict. Yes, you could breathe in safety, but at what cost to your social life? Surprisingly, that mask didn't come with a sense of irony. It came with a side of faraway looks from every party guest. Let's just say, arriving at a 1940s cocktail party looking like you're one inhalation away from being a horror movie extra wasn't exactly the charming wow factor you hoped for. Imagine the look on your friends' faces when you show up for a game of bridge fully equipped with a gas mask, looking like the world's first and least fun superhero. You'll be cutting a rug by the punch bowl, sipping seltzer through a filtering straw while everyone else is indulging in normal conversations about the weather or the latest gossip. Instead, you're navigating social interactions like a tortoise in a racing car, questioning whether your fancy attire trumps your safety equipment. Do you excuse yourself for a snack? Or does that mean risking your low-key horror movie aesthetic? And let's talk about functionality. These masks had features designed by someone who probably skimped on a few social skills. Those rubbery faces were equipped with air filters that were about as pleasant as chewing on a tire. Breathable? Sure. Comfortable? Absolutely not. Donning one of these bad boys was like wrapping your face in a damp sponge, if that sponge were made of dread and anxiety. So now, not only do you have to worry about incoming mustard gas, but you're also sweating buckets under an inch of rubber as you silently pray that no one at the gathering tries to engage in a deep conversation about your newfound fashion choice. Contrast that with the ever-looming notion that, while you're protected against foreign enemies, you'll inevitably become the punchline of every joke at social gatherings. "Oh, look, it's the party's official air quality monitor," they'd say, chuckling into their highball drinks, oblivious to the drama unfolding beneath your mask. Being the only one in the room with breathing apparatus quickly devolved from engaging conversation to tepid small talk about the weather. Really, just the ultimate icebreaker for social isolation. You know what's worse than being the weird person at the party? It's being the person whose health concerns become the prime topic of conversation. But it's not all sad gigs. Let's not forget the unforeseen benefits of being the gas mask wearer. For starters, you'll be the only one on the block who doesn't have to inhale the faint whiff of mildew when that one neighbour mistakenly forgets to thaw their freeze-dried lasagna before firing it up for dinner. You quickly attain an air of mystery. You're that neighbour everyone whispers about behind closed doors with your peculiar breathing apparatus that's often perceived as artsy. Before you know it, you're the resident avant-garde artist, the subject of local opinions and casual speculation. How's that for recognition? And who can forget the sheer agility, or lack thereof, when wearing one of these contraptions? Imagine it's a game of Red Rover, and you've decided to join in while brandishing a gas mask. The other team members clearly must have misjudged you as some nimble athlete, when, in reality, you're more like a wobbly penguin waddling across the ice, slowly but surely preparing your own demise if someone fails to call a pause. Because trust me, if the zombies didn't come after you, the sheer embarrassingly awkward attempts to run away from them will surely illustrate your expertise in chaotic movement. At the end of the day, our friends in the gas mask department were both the arbiters of safety and the accidental clowns of society, forever stuck in the limbo between heroism and hilarity. So while gas masks may have kept our lungs intact, they certainly didn't come with any social guarantees, and perhaps that lesson alone illustrates how the finest innovations can come with a hilarious twist. So here's to the gas mask pioneers, inventors who perhaps never quite knew how to navigate the trenches of life, love and laughter, in a time when humour involved as much risk as relief. After all, if history teaches us anything, it's that being functional doesn't absolve you from gags destined for the ages. The infamous iron claw was an invention born of intrigue and pure chaos. Designed to incapacitate opponents, it seemed more like a medieval torture device than a weapon of choice. Imagine being on the receiving end of this contraption and thinking, why do I feel like I've just entered a gladiatorial game show? As far as beauty regimens go, we should all be thankful it never hit the mainstream. Picture it. A bustling marketplace in medieval Europe, where the latest in weaponry is all the rage. You could grab a loaf of bread and a blunt arrow and think, this is probably normal, as the local blacksmith displays the iron claw like a flashy new iPhone. Now, let's take a moment to visualize this monstrosity. The iron claw resembled a joke your cranky uncle would tell about fancy cooking utensils. Generally comprised of metal and shaped like a giant lobster claw, it was designed to grasp, much like a shopping cart that's persistently possessed by rogue ghosts. This tool, most associated with dismemberment and high drama, would become the go-to for any aspiring villain or overly imaginative artisan who wanted to spice things up at their next medieval soiree. Ever looked at your favourite kitchen gadgets and thought, gosh, this could really cut down on dinner guests? Well, the iron claw is even more extreme. But there's more to this invention than simply being a quirky medieval trinket. Think about the casual conversation among nobles when a new invention pops up. Ah, did you hear about the iron claw? What do you think? Could it be used for gripping pickle jars or snatching potential suitors? Each time someone pitched it as a means of intimidation in duels, you could almost hear the collective eye rolls of spectators again, about to witness a tragedy of epic proportions. Who needs a charming way to win a duel when you can just claw your way to victory? Some people might argue that the iron claw was a demonstration of sheer ingenuity, yet history taught us the limits of creativity. Did it really have to look like something out of a horror movie? Imagine your grand battle scene. Two rivals facing off, clutching their swords with the confidence of children attempting to walk on stilts. You could practically hear the audience yelling, "And they're off!" as one of them pulls out the iron claw. A claw that might be more suited for a lobster boil than a life or death scenario is sure to become the talk of the town, but maybe not for the best reasons. While the concept behind it was novelty, the reality of using the iron claw during actual combat was a death sentence for any knight who found themselves in that chaotic situation. Getting caught in one of those things was like challenging destiny to a dance-off. Sure, it might sound like fun, but you can bet you'll end up with your foot stuck in the spotlight while the world shrinks. When misused, you would end up as lunch for whatever puddle of muck happened to be under the battleground that day. It was a spectacle, yes, but it was also a disaster waiting to happen. Oh, but it gets better. As inventive as medieval weaponry was, the iron claw managed to redefine the term personal injury. It could be equated to those cringe-worthy moments when your friend reaches for a great new hair gadget and inadvertently ends up looking like a porcupine instead. Similar to your buddy getting trapped in this medieval marvel, you couldn't help but feel both horrified and oddly amused, watching them struggle against a now funky fashion statement, while those cheering continued to see it as a spectacle. Sadly, some historians suggest that while people once feared the iron claw, they couldn't help but chuckle whenever it gets brought up at dinner parties. In conclusion, the iron claw serves as a reminder of how wild creativity can lead one down a rabbit hole of madness in the quest for something extraordinary. Despite its grammatical history of hopelessness, its existence makes for a great story about choices gone fundamentally wrong. Perhaps we can all agree, whoever designed it should have received a hefty "thanks but no thanks" award for the sheer absurdity of it, all while reassuring future generations that some things are worth leaving behind in the annals of medieval absurdity. Adult play wasn't always as innocent as it seems in modern-day history, especially when the choking game hits the page. A couple of friends thought they could introduce breath play with something resembling a party trick gone wrong. Let's just say it involved more fistfights than friendships. Who knew that this social phenomenon doubled as an early exit strategy? You wake up one day and your friends, in their infinite wisdom, decide their Saturday evening needs a twist. Something adventurous that don't involve merely binge-watching the latest crime drama. So naturally they land on the idea of breath play. It sounds exhilarating, maybe even ticklish, like an afternoon spent with a moderately sized inflatable pool and half an avocado. But then enter the dark carnival of historical genius that somehow makes choking sound like the next best thing. You'd think, what could possibly go wrong? Well, smart listener, let's step through the door of unintended consequences. First, imagine a room filled with laughter and bad decisions, all while desperately trying to figure out who can inhale less oxygen than everyone else. As you play your part as the enthusiastic participant, they cheer you on like you're about to be crowned the next Olympic athlete. Alas, they forgot that this event came with one caveat. The line between fun and foolishness is thinner than the air you're currently deprived of. Losing consciousness in front of your friends turns out to be less than flattering. So, instead of winning the title of choking champion, you might just receive the honorary title of that one guy who can't handle his friends' nonsense. And if you thought the modern world had a penchant for cautionary signs, just wait until you meet these early adopters of the choking game. With each session, the risk of humiliation mounts, not to mention the risk of serious injury. Picture yourself gasping for air enough to feel like a gaffed fish, only to discover that health professionals recommend literally stop playing that game as advice for life success. Who knew that a night of camaraderie could double as maybe the world's worst choice? But this is not where the drama ends. Fast forward to 5 minutes post-choking escapade. The realization, much too late, that perhaps you treated breath as a disposable resource, like that half-eaten slice of pizza sitting on your buddy's table. You'd have better luck chowing down on cardboard than attempting to make sense of the ludicrous antics you subjected yourself, and your friends to. The irony? You thought you were exploring alternative forms of fun, yet you've officially entered possum mode, lying flat on the floor like a poorly animated character after a poorly executed stunt. Congratulations, you've entered a world where the thrill of near-death experiences isn't actually thrilling. It's just an invitation for life to slap you silly. And alas, the gossip doesn't stop at the door either. Your buddies can't resist sharing the tales of your misadventures for years to come. "Oh man, do you remember when Jerry nearly passed out trying to compete with Gary?" will be the story passed down. The legendary choking champion of your friend group will become a ghost story recounted at more juvenile gatherings, unearthing your shame far beyond the dim lights and questionable choices of that first night. In case you thought it couldn't get worse, just imagine the unfortunate healing process. No, not just an embarrassing bruise across your neck or the inescapable "everyone knows you choked at that party" reminder. Instead, there's the physical reminder of embarrassment that manifests in the symbol of your gag-inducing excursion. Friends now feign concern with reassurance and giggles of nostalgia, creating a behavioural ripple effect that joins you with the world's most notorious party dropouts. Ultimately, this wild ride through adult games serves as a strange mixture of circus and medicine-induced hilarity. You're left with the ultimate irony. A game meant to electrify the moment turns into an unassuming warning. When it comes to invoking adult fun, let's maybe just stick to karaoke and board games instead, shall we? After all, who needs to inhale for the sake of having a good time when you can merely recite your favourite 80s power ballad with confidence? So folks, the choking game, as a historical blip, teaches the vital importance of awareness, consideration, and generally steering clear of games designed to manifest in medical emergencies. Here's to living another day, quite literally alongside unchoked air, stuffed with opportunities better than the choking games that lurk in the annals of history. Teeth whitening turns out to be a hilarious distraction from the many gotcha moments of dental history. Enters the concoction of mercury and bleach, sold like it was the fountain of youth. Did you know those lovely pearly whites could literally drop you flat if you weren't careful? Efforts to brighten your smile might have just invited your demise. Imagine strolling into your local apothecary in the 18th century, greeted by a cheerful shopkeeper who confidently assures you that a concoction just rolled off the lab table is the ultimate key to your sparkling smile. Imagine the envy of your friends when they see your brilliant, blindingly white teeth, he promises, waving a jar filled with a bubbling, suspiciously opaque liquid. You, with no regard for your future sanity, buy a bottle labelled "Whiten your teeth and keep the Grim Reaper away." It makes you feel like $1,000,000, until you realise that was just the mercury making you dizzy. Now let's ponder what took place in the lives of those giggling over a cup of tea while shining their new brightened grins. These folks must have thought they were walking the runway of 1800s dental glamour, blissfully unaware of the ticking time bomb lodged within their mouths. "This is great stuff," said the local nobleman, as he flashed a grin bright enough to signal a ship. But, spoiler alert, those smiles came with a side of madness. Picture yourself at a grand soiree, beaming from ear to ear, teeth glinting like diamonds. But wait a second. What happens when your rather brilliant smile sends a jolt of panic through your friends as they watch you attempt to sip your tea? Turns out, mercury doesn't just whiten your teeth. It can induce a good old-fashioned case of madness. Talk about enhancing your social life. Within a few days, everyone is whispering about that guy with the killer smile who is now one jiggle short of a full jig. My dear, is it the wine or have you lost your mind altogether? Someone asks. eyes wide as you start stumbling over your fresh smile. It's no wonder so many people were left grinning like fools in front of everyone, completely unaware that their love for a gleaming grin was slowly sending them on a fool's journey toward insanity. But it didn't stop there. You see, while the rich pampered themselves with beauty regimens involving all manner of horrid concoctions, the rest of the folks who couldn't afford the mercury delight started using whatever they could scavenge from nature. Charcoal? Check. Lemon juice? Double check. But wait, there's more. They got behind the idea that perhaps the debilitating pain of tooth scraping was a side effect of dental hygiene. So they turned to wool or horsehair for those mind-blowing oral scrubs. Ever tried cleaning your teeth with horsehair? It's about as relaxing as a rabid ferret in a sack. On top of all that, there were folks going the extra mile trying to bleach their way into dental. Celebrity. They'd concoct mixtures that had about as much elegance as a pirate ship's cargo hold, combining what they could find around them: chalk, powder, and heaven knows what. And while some of this inspired a sort of dentally themed DIY revolution, we know how it actually ended. You'd either sparkle or simply walk home minus a couple of teeth. An unfortunate miscalculation. Newsflash. Centuries before we hit the dental hygiene jackpot of fluoride toothpaste and teeth-whitening strips that don't threaten our sanity, people walked around with dreams and schemes of achieving the ultimate smile. Their pearly whites turned into more of a scream for help than a friendly grin. It makes you wonder, was a bright smile winking back at history, mocking it with every inch of tooth losing its enamel? Now let's fast forward to our modern times, where whitening toothpaste proudly boast of hydrogen peroxide serums, making sure we brush safely instead of dreaming of death by dental decor. Good news for all, you can sip your tea and flash a smile without worrying that the only thing to drop will be the spoon. So let's raise a glass to those quirky ancestors who paved the way, or rather squeaked their way, through dental history. They sure knew how to leave an impression, whether they meant to or not. Who would have thought that whitening your teeth could lead to so much chaos? So as you're brushing and whitening today, just remember, maybe a smile comes not only from a bright bite, but from knowing you don't need ancient sadistic magic to achieve it. The gallows was supposed to be a noble exit, but when the noose became just another accessory at the local execution, death started feeling a tad too close for comfort. Who considered that hanging out with a questionable crew was actually your last gathering? Was there a better place to meet? Death has never been so social. Imagine a quaint little town square bustling and lively, until Wednesday rolls around and suddenly it becomes a morbid carnival of fate. Townsfolk gather, eyeing the gallows with a mix of morbid curiosity and a good dose of schadenfreude, all while experiencing a lingering suspicion that spotting a familiar face in that crowd might spell doom. Now, let's take a moment to set the scene. The gallows, a wooden structure rising ominously against a backdrop of grey clouds, looms large, its rustic charm offset by the smell of anxiety mixed with the occasional whiff of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor who's just trying to make a living. The event, and let's not kid ourselves, they considered it one, draws in spectators like moths to a flame, often causing a queue longer than a line for the local bakery. But here's the thing, no one's sure if they're coming for justice or just some next-level entertainment. Perhaps it is a little of both, for the more macabre souls, of course. Consider our poor, unfortunate victim. Maybe we have a thief who couldn't help but spice up his life with someone else's shiny coins. His last meal? Probably as unfortunate as his life choices, perhaps consisting of a stale hunk of bread and a dash of bad luck. As the town crier calls for silence, you can almost hear the nervous whispers of what's going to happen and will he really go through with it? With rampant speculation, because who doesn't love a little about-to-be public drama? The air is thick with both hope and dread as townsfolk crack jokes, really bad ones about the afterlife. And here comes the noose, made from the thickest rope this side of the river. It's practically a showpiece. Picture it, kids. The executioner, dressed more like a grim reaper than a utility worker, puts on what could best be described as the world's most uncomfortable expression as he prepares the noose. Just to add that extra flair, maybe he sprinkles some ominous hand gestures that would make any magician green with envy. "Next trick," they murmur, unable to resist the allure of gallows humour. Great choice, right? Nothing says festival like death hanging delicately from the rafters. As the victim is escorted up to the gallows, a pivotal moment unfolds. It's funny how during a hanging, everyone's on the edge of their seats, some biting nails, others shoving popcorn into their mouths. Because honestly, who doesn't love a good spectacle? The crowd giggles nervously, imagining all the coming attractions of their beloved sinner's life flashing before their eyes, and wondering if he had any regrets. Did he regret that last trip to the tavern when he boldly took a tankard of ale from the wrong person? It's like a medieval version of America's Got Talent, minus the glitter and triumphant music. "Do we have a good drop today?" someone shouts, invoking a chuckle amidst murmurings of "not so clear cut then." The executioner, face set like stone, prepares for the grand finale, unaware that he's become part of the most vast and absurd puppet show of his career. As the noose is placed around the condemned's neck, you can almost feel the collective gasp ripple through the crowd, a moment equal parts adrenaline and anxiety. With a swift pull, the drop ensues, and the townsfolk hold their breath, half hoping for a spectacle, half sobering to the reality of mortality. Let's face it, 1 second you think you're living life, and the next second you're a main attraction in an unwitting memento mori. It makes you rethink that quick trip to the butcher for a cut of fresh beef, doesn't it? So next time the gallows make the local spotlight and you feel the urge to attend, consider, are you looking for justice? Or are you just a little too fascinated by the circus of mortality? Because in the realm of public executions, death becomes less of a sombre affair and more of a pop-up event. And who wouldn't want to say they were there? They may have been ready to pull the trigger on this significant moment, but were we ready for the lesson that followed? Hanging by a thread indeed. Look out, dear audience, every show has its consequences. Enter the infamous suicide parlour, designed to offer a gentle solution to depression. Ironically, people lined up for a perceived escape, only to find themselves cleverly part of a new step. Because in the grand scheme of life, their final destination lined beds with no pillows, where they may as well rest for eternity. Is there a lesson here? Or should we just hire a therapist? This charming establishment, don't let the name fool you, was all the rage in the early 20th century, promising peace and quiet to those weary of life. Think of it as a spa day where the end of life wasn't just a possibility, it was marketed as the main event. Upon entering the parlour, you'd be greeted by soothing decor, dim lighting, and, oddly enough, a menu. Yes, a menu. The kind you'd find in a trendy cafe, where patrons could choose from various options for their final departure, each with more exotic names than a cocktail list in a cocktail lounge. Fancy a shot of fade into bliss, or eternal rest with a side of dream. While you're at it, you can also enjoy a complimentary herbal tea. Lower the anxiety before making the biggest decision of your life. Can you imagine walking in and being handed a card that read, "Choose your exit strategy, smooth sailing or abrupt ending"? It really set the bar high for customer service, or rather, the very last hurrah before a blessed, albeit untimely, exit. Upon settling down, clients relished in the atmosphere while exchanging tales of woe, comparing their emotional baggage like it was a sad version of a fashion show. There's John. the poet who contemplated existence versus the immensity of the cosmos. And there's Linda, who just wanted to escape a particularly awful breakup, and somehow, over shared sighs and melancholic anecdotes, the parlour quickly transformed into an underground therapy session. Who needs modern-day mental health professionals when you have fellow down-and-outs sharing supportive nods and the occasional sad chuckle? But let's talk about the real kicker, the suicides. Despite its ominous title, the suicide parlour didn't have anywhere near the success it anticipated. Turns out you can't just slap a slick name on impending doom and expect people to just waltz through the door like they're heading into a Jamba Juice for a quick pick-me-up. The tragic irony laid in the fact that patrons left with nothing but an acute awareness of life's futility, all while failing to receive actual help for their depression. Those seeking to embrace the sweet embrace of death found themselves ensnared in a social trap, only realizing too late that the gentle nudge toward resting peacefully was likely more like being nudged off a cliff while standing in an awkward group hug. Now imagine the turmoil this brought to those seeking solace. Walking in, hopeful, you'd soon discover that all the inspiring promises of a calm ending blurred into a cacophony of nagging doubts. Is there really no way out other than a lethal cocktail, they questioned, while desperately clutching a glossy pamphlet that read, "Embrace your eternal nap," paired with a metaphorical hammer to the head and an emotional meltdown. One could only assume these patrons left with a greater burden than before, their philosophical musings morphing into an existential dread that could keep a college professor busy for decades. There's a certain awkwardness to a place where people are uniting not in joy but in their shared misery, isn't there? As folks gulped down happiness tonics, believing they would find freedom, they stumbled into a realization most never expected. Maybe they didn't want to die. They simply wanted to feel heard. In the end, what seemed like a clever solution to mental hardship turned into a social experiment gone awry, a tragic comedy where the punchline left everyone aching with confusion. And when the lights dimmed and the final guests staggered toward the door, their heads filled with disallowed aspirations and half-hearted chuckles, one thing became painfully clear. True healing doesn't come from the drama of dramatic exits, but from standing tall together, and possibly just hiring that therapist instead. So if you think you'd like to be the next brave soul to find solace at the parlour, consider seeking companionship instead. Because while the idea of a suicide parlour might tickle history's dark humour, the real laughs lie in making it through together. What a concept! While a parlour not designed for true well-being might implore folks to indulge, the greatest irony was that everyone came looking for peace when the real answer was often a simple hug, or maybe just a good therapist with affordable rates. The suicide parlour may have faded into history, but its lesson remains echoing through modern society. Sometimes the best way forward is simply together, pillow fight or not. Imagine a joyous day on the farm filled with psychedelic cattle. They certainly didn't see it coming and were not quite ready for the magical journey that lay ahead. Experimenting on livestock may seem absurd, but you could say it turned the plot into quite a hoot before it led straight to the butcher. Whoever thought a cow might trip out on a field of daisies? Well, let's dive into this absurdist slice of history, where agricultural antics met surreal consequences. In the quaint land of yesteryears, farmers had more than just crops on their minds. They were intent on experimenting with drugs that made them, and their livestock, see the world through kaleidoscopic lenses. You might think that utilizing psychedelics would be better suited to a hipster cafe than a barnyard, but here we were. Enter the great idea to use ergot, a fungus that grew on rye and could have you questioning what you were really seeing. like that cow that now thought it was a majestic unicorn prancing through a field of rainbows. Farmers initially believed that a little ergot mixed with their cattle's feed could lead to a healthier, happier herd. But rather than frolicking merrily and producing magical milk, the cows ended up in a psychedelic nightmare. Imagine the poor farmer who walked into the field expecting a peaceful grazing scene, only to witness his cattle attempting to dance ballet like it was the final act at the county fair. And have you ever tried to corral a cow on a bad trip? Good luck. You could practically hear the farmer muttering through gritted teeth, "That's not the tango, Buttercup." The reality of these experiments began to sink in when the stress not only sent the cows spiralling into whimsical adventures through their minds, but also escalated into truly odd behaviours. Herd mentality, more like herd hallucinations. Cows would suddenly sprint into the night, convinced that the moon was a giant wheel of cheese. Well, there goes Bessie, chasing the moon again. Keep the gate open. Could be a long night ahead. It was a livestock revolution, complete with existential crises and impromptu performances that would give Broadway a run for its money. This wasn't just harmless fun, however. Besides the inevitable confusion and chaos, some cows actually ended up in distressing physical states, leading to fewer trips to the butcher and more paths to the vet. The unintended consequence of these escapades was the push for regulatory oversight. Not that anyone planned for their milk to take a turn for the trippy. It was a blatant oversight that left both farmers and cows reconsidering their choices. "Looks like we have a few more somersaults than usual, huh?" said one farmer, scratching his head as he stripped the milking station down to the basics, hoping to avoid a psychedelic showdown with his cattle. As time surrendered to progress, the craze moved away from that initial burst of longhorn lounging and toward the invention of more regulated substances. Unfortunately, by this point a few misfortunes had penned the unfortunate fate of many a cow. There were reports of livestock mysteriously disappearing, making casual farm life a frustrating riddle, or perhaps the most imaginative escape plan of all time. The cows are probably still giggling in an alternate dimension, claiming they were destined for glory but ended up with a fate worse than mushroom soup. Fast forward a few decades, and those capers brought us to a time where farmers were shifting gears. They traded psychedelic shenanigans for safer bets in veterinary science and animal welfare. Gone were the days of flying cows led by the whims of psychedelic winds. Instead, diligent farmers now ensure their cattle feast on nutritious feed that keeps them calm and collected. No more soaring visions or bizarre prancing. They were content to munch on grass, thank you very much, and leave the exploration to the psychedelic hippos in the realm of imagination. So, while ergot-enriched escapades may sound like the plot of a slapstick comedy from the 60s, it's a whimsical dance that speaks to the creativity found, even amidst the chaos of livestock and farming practices. Who knew that a trip to the farm could turn into an adventure of wonders? You can chuckle at the absurdity, grateful your stroll through the countryside today doesn't involve a troop of uncontrollable, colourful cows. Here's hoping your next visit to the local farm is less of a dazzling circus act and more grounded in reality, with a side of tasty, non-psychoactive milk. Let's be thankful that those marvellous days of psychedelic bovine ballet are behind us, and perhaps remember to leave the experimentation to the scientists. Finally, we arrive at the granddaddy of them all. Devices built solely to hoard your junk instead of your cash. They took over your home and became instruments of horror. You were faced with the inability to escape when you were suddenly inundated by decades of random paraphernalia. Who knew collecting would feel more like an avalanche hidden under the bed? Talk about commitment. Imagine stepping into a room so cluttered that every step felt like navigating a landmine of forgotten treasures, faded collectibles, novelty items from the 80s, and ancient electronics that no one has any idea how to operate. Especially that VHS player that went from cool to a cultural relic faster than you could say blockbuster. These devices of hoarding were made to organise your life, but let's be honest, they just created a chaotic playground for dust bunnies and the occasional lost sock. Your room feels like an episode of a reality show, where the bravest participants face off against piles of priceless junk. What's even more absurd is the way this hoarding phenomenon started. Initially, these devices were sold with promises of organisation and space saving, the kind of marketing that gave rise to two glorious words: multifunctional. Here's the kicker: you could stack, nest, and expand these contraptions, all while thinking you'd finally rid yourself of the clutter. That is, until you open the drawer to find items you genuinely couldn't recall bartering your soul for. A ceramic unicorn, a taxidermied squirrel, and a half-used bottle of glitter glue. It was the adult equivalent of digging through your childhood toy box and praying you never find that one awkward action figure that haunts your dreams. Of course, you might try justifying it all with a little mantra. It's not clutter, it's potential. The truth, however, is that a stack of old newspapers doesn't become a Pulitzer-worthy journalistic masterpiece, no matter how much you wish it would. And then there were those handy gizmos marketed as storage solutions. Think Tupperware on steroids, designed with more compartments than a Swiss Army knife. But give it a few months, and they end up housing mysterious leftovers from a summer barbecue you vaguely remember, complete with all kinds of suspicious odours. Forget food safety. It's like a time capsule of questionable culinary choices. Here's where the humour leaks into madness. Every time you think you've reached peak collective chaos, your storage solutions defeat you with sheer growth. Had a mini hoard, it's now a medium hoard. Because who doesn't need a dozen plastic bins filled with items you'll definitely use someday, right? And the commercials for stackable bins always show pristine homes, where curated collections bring joy, filling entire rooms with awe-inspiring arrangements. Meanwhile, back at your place, you've created your own junk dystopia, where the only arrangement is slightly messier than yesterday. Now let's imagine the day-to-day life of someone who's introduced these monstrous devices into their lives. Every morning, as you excitedly stride into your organisation hub, the site of your collective failures, you're confronted with judgmental family members who, much like an angry council, silently demand to know why the cardboard boxes are starting to grow into a familial kingdom of disaster. And yet, there you are, shuffling sideways, emerging from this cardboard maze like an overzealous alien spaceship invader, trying to rescue the last remaining priceless artifact, the long-lost collection of Beanie Babies from 1998. Before long, you're on a first-name basis with every valuables retrieval service in town. They become your best friends, and why not? After confronting your penguin figurine collection, you realise it's time to organise a little expedition. Cue the dramatic music. You gather friends, snacks, and possibly a therapist on standby to excavate your valuables before the next social gathering becomes an uncomfortable roundup of the absurd possessions you amassed. Through the madness of these unstoppable hoarding devices, what started as an attempt to declutter transformed your abode into a spectacle for the ages, half storage facility, half wildlife refuge. The quest for organisation swiftly spirals into an exploration of personal identity, as well as the realisation that humans can turn anything, including junk, into an art form. So here's to the hoarding devices of yore, the true culprits of undone ambitions, cluttered lives, and ghostly laughter echoing through hallways where good intentions failed to materialise. Past the avalanche of clutter lies an often unintentional hilarity, because life is a journey, and in this adventure of absurd accumulation, we just might discover ourselves, and how much of it we can actually fit into the comedy act of modern society